Hello, welcome to my channel. On this channel, I offer my political commentaries about United States as well as Pakistan and rest of the world. And today I want to talk about generally about conservatism and what are some of the main problems associated with it as a way of life or as a philosophy. Now, pretty much all conservative praxis and thought relies on a past precedence to define itself. What do I mean by that? Anytime someone is culturally conservative, they always have this idea of a stable, romantic past which is being lost, and they want the present to conform to that. And so their efforts are constantly against the present and to forestall a future so that they can constantly make sure that the past that they think was better than the present remains intact. Now, if you live your life according to that mindset in terms of time, then you are constantly in trouble because you are trying to stem the natural progress of time itself, and within that, human behavior. And you can see that in American politics. The conservative political party and its extreme wings, the farther right you go, what you realize that they will bring you biblical references, they will bring you references from 17th century. They want a world as simple, as less complex as it used to be, which is impossible in today's world. But in order to achieve that, then they constantly support the political positions that at least promise that. In terms of religious conservatism, it becomes slightly more philosophical. Now, every religion gives you a moral code, tells you how to live your life. In a democracy, no one stops you from living that moral life. The problem occurs when people want the general culture to adapt to what they think is a moral life, right? And that you see in American politics. But religious conservatism also basically, even if it is text-based, reads a certain text a certain way, a text that is a historical text, and then wants the present to conform to the dictates of those texts. And then also anyone who doesn't follow the dictates of those texts becomes suspect, right? Become liberals or become a threat to your way of looking at life. Now, the reason I started thinking about it was because a few years ago in one of my graduate classes, I mentioned, within the context of a larger discussion, that conservative thought, there is an impossibility inscribed in it, and that is that there is only a certain limit to which it can go, and beyond that it enters boundaries and places that are impermissible, and hence it is not necessarily free thought, and it is not necessarily thought that can reach its ultimate end or conclusion. And one of the students who at that moment I didn't know was deeply conservative kind of felt offended by it, and I had to explain to her my philosophical reasoning for it. And my idea was that if something outside of you is telling you what to think and what not to think, and what to do and what not to do in moralistic sense, then your thought is already constricted by those restraints that exist outside of you, but also within, because you have internalized them. And because of that, what I'm saying is not that conservative thought is weak, but that it has its limitations because it's doubly wedged, right, internally and externally. Overall, in terms of politics, if you look at American politics, right now all that the conservative movement has is fear, hate, and a certain disregard for people who might look different or might act differently. And Mr. Trump, a symptom of that, right? But also kind of an apotheosis of that thought. Here is a person who has never cared for anyone in his life, who has never had to struggle, has no empathy, right? And can openly say sexist, racist things. But this is the person who's being championed by the conservative movement because they believe he tells the truth even though he lies all the time. So these are the limitations of conservative thought, that it cannot even look at its own self critically, and sometimes it cannot even apply its own principles to what it sees in the world. If you look at conservative scholarship, the books published by conservative scholars, sometimes when you read them and you realize there might not even be a peer review process because they keep repeating the same things without citing each other. So there is a myth in American culture and politics that somehow people on the left have herd mentality and they are not individuals and they don't think for themselves. And that's absolutely a false myth, because people on the progressive left are not necessarily a monolith. Of course, the conservatives are not also a monolith, but it is the hardest thing in the world to get a few progressives on the same platform, because each one of them has their own agenda, their own politics, and they are very avidly working towards achieving that agenda. So overall, anytime you think in conservative terms or act in conservative terms, something outside of you, a larger authority, a larger power, a larger identity group over determines how you view the world. And the problem with that is that you already enter the world thinking of your own people and people who are not your own. My 30-year experience in the United States clearly has taught me that people who are generally progressive and liberal are more accepting, more tolerant, right? More resilient in so many ways, and more helpful to others. And there can be nothing better than that. So these are some of my thoughts, tentative as they are, on the limitations of conservative thought and limitations of living a conservative life or practicing a conservative politics. Now, something else also happens because of this. If you inscribe yourself into an ideology either imposed or proffered to you from outside, and of course you see the world according to that ideology, and sometimes in order to sustain that ideology you have to remain uncritical. You have to tell yourself not to watch certain things, not to learn certain things. Think of all the parents who are terrified that your children would discover this on the internet, that on the internet. So instead of enabling them to think critically, educating them so that they should make wise decisions, right? What these parents try to do is try to protect them from those terrible influences, and then politically try to control the society and its move towards the future, which is an impossibility, right? But if you're trying to stem the tide of time and stem the tide of progress and reduce diversity, then your politics becomes geared towards silencing people, isolating them, putting them in prisons, putting children in little cages, right? And then you become okay with it, right? All of that happens because your view of the world is informed by a past which may not even be real but idealized. And you want that past to determine and control life in the present. In order to do that, you support these politicians who promise you all these things, right? And then you end up creating a world for yourself which becomes increasingly intolerant, increasingly hateful, and afraid of others. Now, I'm not even going to go into economic conservatism, but that's completely another interesting field to explore. But I thought I should share these thoughts with you on my general take on the basic problems of conservative thought, politics, and praxis. That's all. I hope this is of some use to you. This is my political channel, so I speak more openly here. If you're interested in more academic and scholarly materials, please visit my channel, Post Colonial Space. But if you like what I'm offering here, please do subscribe. And as always, ask me any questions you want in the comment section, and I'll be happy to respond to them. Thank you. And as always, peace and love.